Welcome to another episode with me. This one should be quite interesting because I got my friend Drew from the US here with me, and we're gonna talk about a few things. I don't know what we got into. So Drew, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, totally. Thanks for having me on. So I'm Drew. I'm 31. I come from Chelmsford, Massachusetts, where I grew up for my first 18 years, and then after graduating college, I moved to Florida in Tampa to go to university down there. I lived in Tampa for 10 years before moving to Mexico, so now I'm on year 3+ in Mexico.
Why Mexico? What brought you to Mexico?
To be honest, since I was 16, I wanted to move to Costa Rica. So I always wanted to leave Massachusetts and go somewhere tropical. And I don't know, I found Costa Rica on some website and I saw the pictures and I was like, yeah, that looks like a place you can live every day in a hammock with a Corona or something and just have a really chill lifestyle. So I had this idea in my head that I was like, oh, all my friends and I can go move to Costa Rica and just live together and be roommates there and start a life down there for whatever reason, just because it was beautiful and tropical. So fast forward to when I was thinking about moving, Mexico was still that tropical vibe, but was a lot closer and easier to travel to. It was easier to stay for a long term stay, without having to leave the country and come back in and all that. And then it was also a lot cheaper than Costa Rica. So those things kind of made me change my mind from Costa Rica to Mexico.
So did you first arrive to Mexico City, or how did that happen? What was your journey like? I don't like that word. How did you get here?
Okay. So when I first came to Mexico, I went to Merida. So that's kind of an expat hub for people on the East Coast. So my family's pretty much all in Massachusetts. My ex at the time had her family in Florida. We were leaving Florida. So Merida was one of the closest places we could go to that also had the community of expats that we were attracted to when we were looking at places to move.
Mm-hmm. And how long were you in Merida for?
So I arrived in October 2019, just a few months before COVID tried to ruin everything. So basically moved there, and then in 3 months, my mom and my brother had just come down and visit, and then COVID happened and everything shut down. And then I must have stayed another 3 months, so maybe a half year in total.
Okay. And what were your impressions of Merida? Well, keep in mind, I haven't been there,
mm-hmm.
So I imagine it was humid. That's about it. What can you tell me about Merida? What were your impressions?
All right, so I guess going in, what I had assumed was I'm leaving Florida, going to Merida. So it's just Florida. It's hot and it's humid and totally gonna be used to it and whatever. And I got there in October, so it seemed like that at first. And it's another level. It's it's not comparable. It really is. It's hotter. It's somehow more humid than Florida. So my first impression was that, oh, this is great. The weather's wonderful. It's October, November, December. And then as soon as March hit, I realized there's no way I could keep living here throughout a summer, especially.
Why? What happened?
Oh my goodness. So the hottest month is probably April. So April happened. The city was shut down because the regulations were very strict in COVID. So you basically couldn't leave your house, it seemed like. And in Fahrenheit, it was about 107 degrees for 2 weeks to a month. It was over 102 almost every day of April. So yeah, at that point, it was we can't really do this. The air conditioning isn't exactly the same as Florida, where you go into every building and it's central air and it's freezing as soon as you go in a building. In Merida, it was a struggle, to be honest with you, staying calm or staying cold. You kind of get out of the shower and then you're immediately I'm not sure if I'm still wet from the shower or if I just immediately started sweating now that I've been out of the shower for 10 seconds.
Oh my God. Wait, okay, so you were there for about, you said half a year, right? Half a year, you decided it was really hot and unbearable. Did you come to Querétaro right after, or did you have another stop in between?
Yeah, so I had, I would say, one other stop between. So I left Merida and went to the Playa del Carmen area. There's a small community called Puerto Aventuras, which is between Tulum and Playa del Carmen. And it's a lovely place right on the water. It's super beautiful and everything. And it was close to Merida, so that was kind of like the first escape. It wasn't, getting completely out of the humidity and the heat and stuff, but there's no place like Merida. So I thought kind of any step away from that is an improvement. And, the water's there, so I was thinking, ocean breeze, maybe it's a little more mild and doable, windy, more comfortable. And more than anything, it was very open because it's a different state than Merida. So the rules or the regulations for COVID were completely different. So you could live more of a normal life, still be able to go outside and do things. Whereas in Merida, it was impossible. It was completely shut down.
So could you give me an example of something that you could do in one but not the other?
Yeah, just simply eating outside at restaurants. So I think at the time I was able to eat outside, but not inside at restaurants in the Playa del Carmen area. And in Merida, not that you would want to because it was unbearable heat, but even if you wanted to, I don't think you were legally allowed to do that. So that was something, and there's a lot of stores, a lot of restaurants, a lot of activities that you could kind of do outside around Playa del Carmen that Merida just doesn't have set up.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of us who are currently in Mexico came to Mexico during the pandemic and decided to simply stay.
So how do you feel about, were you happy that you were here then?
Oh, absolutely. Mexico has been a very, very pleasant surprise for me. I had visited here before, and I always knew it's a great country with delicious food and good things going on. Despite the not so good things, but I never imagined myself being here during the pandemic. And when I was very happy that I was here and just starting over. When you arrived to Mexico, what were some of your first impressions or things some misconceptions that you had that you were like, oh wait, this isn't what I thought, but that's cool?
All right, let me start with first impressions. So being in Merida and also, I guess, being in Playa del Carmen to a degree also, one thing I quickly realized was I was 28 at the time, and I was by far the youngest expat I had met, right? So in Merida, the majority of the people I met there were retired or really early retirement ages, people who wanted to retire early and leave their jobs or their life or whatever in the United States and kind of get that retirement 10, 20 years early, but they were still probably all 15, 20 years older than me, right? So especially in the centro of any city other than Querétaro, I've noticed that most people are retiree age. So I was like, oh, this is great meeting all these people from the United States, from Canada, wherever. But I was also kind of missing having, friends my own age to do the same types of things that I used to do back in the States.
That was very politely put. Do you mean you just wanted to party?
Yeah, guess that is part of it. Definitely the partying. I love doing active things. I'm big into sports. So, I don't know, things like kayaking, hiking, playing football, basketball, things like that I really missed. I didn't really get any of that, though. Not that there's that much to do outside in the Merida area, but that was some of the other things I missed other than just the partying aspect.
Well, Yes, I have seen you. What is it? No, I haven't seen you. Why did I say I've seen you rock climbing? I haven't seen you rock climbing.
No, but I definitely want to go rock climbing. So that's one of the things that I have the desire to do. I'm actually very afraid of heights, but that is one of the things that I'm cool with facing my fears and doing anyways, or at least indoors. I have no desire to do that outdoors.
Okay. Well, have you been to some of the places around Querétaro? I think that there's quite a lot of nature, and I know that there's a lot of hikers in the Querétaro area, and I know a couple of rock climbers. Have you ventured out to do those activities, or not yet?
All right, so I signed up to venture out, and I had planned to venture out actually last Saturday, and I had to cancel. It was going to be my first hike, and I had a really late Friday night, so something like 4 a.m, and I was supposed to leave at like 6 a.m, but I was still awake from the night before. So I hate being that person, but I canceled last minute. But I did join a group of people on WhatsApp that are looking to do hikes every couple weeks or every month or something like that. So I still plan on going to like the Sierra Gorda or other places around where I can hike and enjoy nature.
So one of your surprises was the number of retirees in Mexico from the U.S., right? Okay. Well, what other pleasant surprises did you experience after arriving here that maybe you wouldn't have known without moving here first?
All right, so I think I had a very limited view and understanding of what Mexico was like. So maybe the stereotypical thing that you think of being an American thinking of Mexico is like just beaches. Like, all right, you're gonna have tacos, other great food, margaritas, you're gonna be on the beach. So I was actually very surprised to learn how mountainous the central area of Mexico is, because all I think of is Cabo, Cancun, places like that. And come to find out, I was completely wrong in thinking that was all Mexico had to offer, because there is a lot of places with cooler climates and that are very mountainous, which is something, having lived in Florida for 10 years before Mexico, I was kind of craving, because I've lived in such a flat area for so long. I did not think I'd find that in Mexico.
Where else have you been in Mexico? So you've been to Merida. You're here in Querétaro now. I assume you've been to Mexico City. Where else have you been?
So I've been to Mexico City just for a day, and that is nowhere near enough to even know a portion of Mexico City. So I've been everywhere around the Yucatan Peninsula. So that Merida, I've been to like Progreso and other beaches along the coast of the Yucatan. I've been to Quintana Roo, which has Cancun and Playa del Carmen, Tulum. I've been to Chiapas. I've been to a little bit of Oaxaca and Campeche. So most of the southeast. And now I'm kind of hoping to travel more around central Mexico and western Mexico.
That's certainly more than I have seen. That's amazing. What would you say is one of your favorite places in Mexico from the lists that you just gave?
Okay, yeah, I would say that to visit the Yucatan is definitely up there, because there are so many cenotes, and those are so far my favorite things in Mexico. So if you don't know what a cenote is, it's like a sinkhole that was created from a meteor hitting in the Gulf of Mexico thousands of years ago. And there are thousands of these little holes that have filled up over time with like crystal clear water in the majority of them. And so some are in caves, some are outside. And it's just so serene, so scenic to go in one. Every time I've been to a cenote, it just gives me more desire to see more of them.
Okay.
Like, thank goodness there's no fucking camera on this.
Right? So you really like cenotes. I went to a cenote for my birthday. I can completely agree with you. It's quite a magical experience to be surrounded by so much darkness and blue. So you've been here a while now. What would you say are some of the things that have changed about you since you've arrived to Mexico?
Definitely my job. So when I left Florida, I basically sold almost all the possessions I had, except for my golf clubs and my clothes. And I quit my job. So I started teaching English online, which was like this stereotypical job when people have been traveling around, if they're not doing YouTube videos or something, like the next most stereotypical job I heard of was teaching English online, which was great. I started teaching to children in China for the first about year that I was in Mexico. After that year, China changed their laws where I was not legally able to teach their students in the program I was using unless I lived in China. So that was kind of a killer there. So yeah, I changed my job. I'd say I changed what I focus on during the day, and what I mean by that is like in the United States, you pretty much just work until you get home, and then you're exhausted, you have to eat, maybe you go to the gym or you have some sort of routine or you watch TV, and next thing you know, the day's over, right? You don't have any energy for anything else. You don't have like really the desire for anything else. So I think now that I'm here and I have a little more free time, a lot more energy, I've been able to focus more throughout my day on like cooking and eating better, on learning things such as Spanish and other languages, or skills that I've been trying to learn, like computer programming. Whereas before I would never have the time or the energy to do that when I was in the States still.
So what I'm hearing is you have more time for yourself, more positive lifestyle changes. And yeah, I agree with that. I really loved my life in the U.S. I have to say that it had its charm, but I do agree with you that it did always seem like we were always on a hamster wheel, right? Mm-hmm. So
it's part of maybe like the culture that was part of the reason I wanted to leave, was like you kind of live to work in a lot of cases instead of work to live. And you spend so much of your time and energy just worrying about getting stuff done at work, getting promoted at work, working all the time, where that kind of consumes your life. And that was always something I realized I didn't want to have in my life. I wanted to go somewhere where obviously you have to work to keep everything going, but it wasn't like the complete focus of everything you do. So there's definitely plenty of things I miss about the States, but that was one of the reasons I wanted to leave. So now I have more time, like you said, to focus on me, which doesn't always, that time doesn't always get used wisely. You still procrastinate or just spend a night binging TV shows or do just totally unproductive things that don't actually help you work on yourself. But you still have plenty of that extra time where you get to do what you want to do.
Well, I think that race to get promoted and have a good job and get a good position, I think it also exists in Mexico. What would you say is the difference between us expats who had that sort of setup back home in the U.S. versus a lot of the locals who are still, trying to get promoted, they still work for a company, this kind of life? Do you think there's a difference between us, or not really?
That's a good question. I think it's very similar with people who live here and are working like that. I think maybe in the United States that dial is turned up a little bit, where it's everything kind of to the extreme, right? Like super competitive. People are always working kind of, your status is often viewed based on what you do for work. It's kind of like a badge of honor to only sleep 4 hours because you work, or, oh, I work 50 hours a week. Well, he works 60 hours a week. And you're kind of often getting compared to people like that. So I think it's just a higher degree in the United States than it is here, but certainly similarities.
I agree. I also think that just going off of what you said, I think there's a lot more, well, in my experience, I'm sure this is not true for everyone, but I've noticed that there is a lot of support here from friends and family. So if you are, working a lot, it's not as solitary as it might be back home. And I think that might be cultural. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it comes back to not having the energy or the time, right? It's like, who wouldn't want to help all of their friends in their career and in their personal life improve and stuff like that? And it's like, at home in the States, I don't know who has time for that. You're like, I just got done working, 10 hours today. I don't have the energy for that. Like, I'm barely working on me. Like, I can't help you. So I do think maybe the time and the energy is a big part of that. Also, it's definitely a big culture thing that I realized. People here, I find, are much more helpful and looking to help people than in my experience in the United States. For example, if your Spanish isn't great and someone is trying to help you but they don't speak English, like, they're still going to take the time to try and help you, get where you're going, or buy what you need to buy, or help you in whatever way they can. Whereas I would feel like in the United States, people don't have the patience to try and help someone like that. If someone didn't speak English and, we're busy in the United States, we often wouldn't take the time to do everything we can do to help that person out. It's more like, oh yeah, well, that person's on their own.
Yeah, especially in big cities, I would assume, like that stereotypical, New York, hey, get out of the way kind of thing.
Walking here.
Okay, so what is something that you miss from back home?
Oh, I get that question so much. I think friends and family are the things I miss the most. So that's always the first thing I go to. If I had to dive deeper, there are certainly things I miss, like things I used to think were dumb and took for granted, like things in the grocery store. Maybe it's good sometimes that I can't find the goldfish that I always want to binge on and stuff like that. But I do miss just having that option of all the foods I've been accustomed to in the United States, and always having that available to go buy somewhere. I definitely miss the convenience of things at times. If something's broken and you call someone out, they're going to probably be there when they say they're going to be there. You know what I mean? You're like, all right, this guy is going to come over today at 5. Like, you can pretty much expect they're going to be there at 5, or they're going to let you know, like, hey, I'm running a little late at this other job. I'll be there 5:30, whatever. You get the heads up. Whereas here, it's more like you are on Mexican time. It's not your time that someone maybe has to sacrifice what they're doing to come help you. Whereas in the United States, especially because there's so many options, people are always grinding to get that work in. And that is in your favor when you're in need of something and not the worker.
That's a very interesting insight. That's a very, very interesting insight. I do like those goldfish too. I have somebody who's a couple of friends who are coming back to Querétaro from the U.S. and they were like, "Do you want something, Michelle? Like, we can bring it to you." And I was like, "Can you go to CVS and get me some goldfish?"
Oh my God! For me too, the other one is the Little Debbie's oatmeal cream pies. Oh my God! Like, it's on the other side of the coin. It's very good. I can't find these things because I'm very much I have a kind of binging personality. It's like, if I get those goldfish, I'm eating the whole bag. If I get like the Little Debbie stuff, like, that should last me a month. It's gonna last me like 5 days. until it's gone. So I miss it, but at the same time, it's good that I can't easily find that and like go buy that anytime I want.
Right, because when you go home, you appreciate it more, and it's like the most delicious one you've ever had, right?
I mean, that's true. There's also, I've found the nostalgia for things like this are like a big driver of why I want these things. I'm like, all right, goldfish, like I just miss those so much from my past, and I eat them and I'm like, the thought or my memory of what this goldfish was going to be for me is so much greater than like the reality. Or the Little Debbie stuff, I'm like, oh man, I miss that so much, and then I eat it, I'm like, that's not as good as I guess what I once thought it was. Or I always used dip in the United States, so I'd like, oh, go find some tobacco, and then I would try it again and be like, why did I love this so much? It's like the memory of it was like, oh, I used to love these things, and then I get them and I'm like, yeah, it's really just your memory kind of portraying those things as better than they actually are.
On the topic of food, what is your favorite thing to eat here? Like if you could just like pick one or two.
All right, 𝐚𝐧𝐶 If I could go back to the Yucatan and Merida and have some tacos at 𝐚𝐧𝐶, that would probably be my best. Now, it's been a couple of years since I've been there, so that's the nostalgia thing kicking in again, but my memory of it was like, all right, that is the favorite taco that I've had in Mexico, and people are very proud of their food here. So if you try and get that same type of food from the Yucatan and you get it somewhere else, it doesn't seem the same. And people will admit that too, especially people from the Yucatan who take pride in the food they make. They would say there's no way you can get the same quality anywhere else, even in Mexico.
What about the food in Querétaro? Is there something that you really like eating here?
I'm so easy to please, to be honest with you. So I love all food that isn't too spicy. So do I have a favorite? I don't think so.
Well, I'm not the biggest fan of cochinita pibil, but I really like my tacos al pastor for sure. Sure.
And you said you have not been to Merida?
That's correct.
I rest my case. You haven't had real cochinita pibil.
What do you wish people back home knew about Mexico?
So I think the most stereotypical question I get is about safety, or the warning. People are always like, oh, you're going to Mexico, be careful, whatever. Like, oh, we hear all these things on the news. So I think people don't realize, at least in my own experience, how safe it is here. I think we also tend to stereotype safety with the quality of things that people have. You're like, oh, there's a nice house, there's a nice yard, there's a nice street, like, oh, it's safe here. Or if the opposite, you're like, oh, well, that house is kind of and that street is full of potholes and it's gross and there's graffiti over there, something like that. You immediately think like, oh, this place is dangerous. But I think those two things aren't always really related here. Obviously people don't have as much money typically here as in the United States. So some of the things may not be as nice. The yard might not have perfect grass. The house may have old, worn out paint. Maybe you found there was graffiti somewhere. That doesn't associate with the area being dangerous. In the United States, we often hear about like mass shootings or who knows, drunk driving, just lots of things that actually could be far more dangerous than in Mexico. So when people are like warning me to be careful here, I feel like I've actually probably never been statistically safer.
Have you ever felt unsafe in Mexico?
No, I'm sure if you go looking for trouble, I'm sure you can find it. I've never felt unsafe personally. I've walked plenty of places at night, and again, not walking through like these neighborhoods full of mansions or something like that. Walking through neighborhoods that aren't very wealthy with people outside in dark areas, stuff like that. No one's ever given me any problems. Honestly, when people want to talk to me or, I'm by myself and they bother me, usually it's just people who want to practice speaking English because they see someone that obviously is not from Mexico, and people just always are looking for an opportunity to kind of practice their own English.
You've brought up something interesting about people speaking to you to practice their English. And what a lot of people, I guess, may or may not realize about you, and it's something that I admire very much about you, is that you really do hang out with locals. You hang out with Mexicans. Your friends are, I've bumped into you and you're just like the only American in the group, and you're speaking Spanish, and in the WhatsApp groups, all your messages are in Spanish. And I think that Americans get a bad reputation for not learning the language, which, and not just specifically for Americans, but a lot of expats have this reputation around the world because, learning a language is hard, and some people make an effort and just don't get it. And some people, just are happy to stay in their communities, which, for one reason or another, it might also be okay. How did you get to a point where you speak such good Spanish and you feel so comfortable with the people and you hang out with them every weekend? How did you learn? How was that like for you?
All right, so I made like a list of all the ways I've learned. So, just so I can set the scene, I probably average like between 5 minutes to an hour a day of studying some sort of Spanish. So when I list these things, don't think like I'm out there for hours every day trying to learn these things. But I made a list of all the different ways that I have practiced or learned Spanish. So first, I came here 3 years ago not speaking any Spanish other than like, counting 1 to 10 or like the simple things that everybody already knows. So I started learning on Duolingo maybe a couple months before I came to Mexico. But at that time, I really still hadn't learned anything. You think you're going to study every day, and then you get home from work and you're like, what, I'm just going to relax. I got to cook. I'm just going to watch a TV show and then fall asleep. I'm not going to spend my whole day working and studying. So I came to Mexico with very little Spanish. I started on the app Duolingo, which I found to be great for learning like vocabulary and grammar for the first time, but hasn't been the most helpful as far as speaking or understanding someone who's speaking to you. But I kind of start with that and learn the vocabulary. So when I hear it later in a conversation, I have some understanding of what it means. I also went to a website called Holaquepasa.com. It was just articles in Spanish that had like vocabulary in there. So, most of it was kind of simple, and then more of the difficult things were kind of highlighted and explained after the article, so I could kind of learn new vocabulary that way. I started off when I was in Merida doing group classes with mostly other Americans, so that was helpful. But at the same time, what I found I don't like in group classes is if you're the most knowledgeable, most advanced student, that hasn't been a great fit. Like I would always rather be the person with the least amount of knowledge, because then I guess the class kind of goes at your pace, versus when I was the person who knew the most Spanish, and then you'd have to wait on the people learning stuff you'd already know. So it was helpful, but wasn't exactly my favorite way of learning. I listened to a couple podcasts in Spanish. So one was the Duolingo stories where they do Spanish and English. So that's entertaining and helpful to just train your ears to listen to Spanish and sometimes get an explanation in English if you didn't know, what you were hearing. Another podcast was called No Hay Tos, which was a podcast my friend told me about that's just focused on Mexican Spanish, right? Because some of the phrases, some of the words used here you're not going to learn on Duolingo, which is just broad Spanish, or you're not going to learn in your high school class or something like that. Things that really only apply to Mexico, where if I take this Spanish and I go to Peru, where I would really love to visit, and I start speaking some of these phrases, it's not going to make sense to the people in Peru. It's just specifically for Mexico, which has been very helpful for me. And the third podcast I've listened to is called Unlimited Spanish. It was someone from Spain, so it was helpful, again, to train my ears to hear Spanish in a different accent, to hear different things being said. But some of the things that I focused on learning were not helpful at all here. So basically, whenever I'm walking, cooking, cleaning, doing something that I don't need to think about, or I am not like, it's not something fun that I'm focused on, I'm usually listening to Spanish with it so I can get something out of it while doing the cooking, while doing the cleaning, stuff like that. There's an app called Lyrica, which was kind of a fun way to learn Spanish. It was learning Spanish through songs, so they would just play some famous songs and kind of translate it and, let you know what Shakira meant when she was singing this or whatever. So it was like a fun way to learn, just to switch things up. So I'm not like just learning grammar and sentence structure and, I don't know, more boring book type learning like that. I watched a lot of things on YouTube. Some of them are actually lessons for Spanish, which are helpful, and some of them are just like entertaining to me, I guess. I really liked watching traveling vloggers, so I could see different areas of Mexico, different areas of different countries that maybe I want to visit one day, see what the beach is like over here, see what the mountains are like over there. But I would watch in Spanish with English subtitles, so I know what's happening, and I'm getting something like entertainment value out of it, but I'm still learning some Spanish at the same time. Then there was Lingopie, which is a website where you can watch cartoons in Spanish. So it was like, I would watch, cartoons for like 10-year-olds. I've watched Peppa Pig in Spanish just to learn. And,
the dedication is amazing.
I'm saying, but this is over a span of 3 years, right? So it's not like I'm watching Peppa Pig every day, but it was just like, I found, right, you need to speak, learn, or listen to something where 80% or the majority of the Spanish you understand. With some of it you don't. So you're kind of using context clues to learn new things, and you're not getting lost. So at some points, Peppa Pig was right at my level, if not too advanced for me. So I was like, hey, let's start off there. Why not? Now I am in a language exchange group where local people are trying to learn more English. Us expats are trying to learn more Spanish, and we're just like in a group talking with people and kind of helping each other out, where right now we're kind of doing 15 minutes in English, and then, we switched to Spanish for 15 minutes. So I'm helping someone else kind of improve their English or practice speaking and listening in English, and then we all change to try and practice our speaking, listening skills in Spanish. And the most helpful thing for me was I started doing classes online on a website called Preply with a teacher who's from Mexico City, because I had learned more like vocabulary and grammar and stuff like that I couldn't use. It's like, I could recognize that in writing. I could answer the questions correct on the app, but if I wanted to speak it, I wouldn't know where to start, because on the app, I don't know, you have context clues, you have the words that you can read, you have hints. When it comes to conversation, you have like 1 second to figure out what they said, what you're going to say, etc. And you don't really have time to sit there and think about everything that you want to say. It has to come naturally. So those are all the ways that I learned. And of course, friends have been very helpful in teaching me as well.
I admire all your hustle with the language learning because it does take dedication. For example, like my Spanish, I'm half Mexican. I absorbed it as a child. I don't really consider it a huge talent that I speak Spanish. So when I see people like you who have put in the work, who are like, okay, I could be cleaning the kitchen in silence or listening to a podcast from home, but you know what? I'm going to listen to something in Spanish. That takes, I don't think people realize the act of thinking that requires. So good job. I really admire you for that, Drew.
Thanks. I admire that you can just like learn things without having to like, I could be wrong, but it seems like you don't have to do all this studying because you love languages. It comes easier, at least than me, to you, where you can learn new things. And it seems like you pick up on things like when we're talking with other people that speak other languages, you listen and then you're like, oh, I can repeat back what you said. And I listen and I hear just blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I don't know, like my ears aren't trained like that. It doesn't come easy to me.
You clearly haven't seen me with the French. That is a very common misconception about people who speak different languages because there's many different reasons for why somebody speaks multiple languages. In my case, I'm fluent in 3, but that's because I grew up with these languages. And it's I wouldn't say it was easy, but it's certainly easier than an adult learning Spanish because as a child, you don't have all these obstacles, mental obstacles, like what are they going to think of me, blah, blah, blah. You just absorb it. Children are amazing. But as an adult, I think that, for example, when I was living in China and it was my turn as an adult to learn a new language, I really struggled with that. Like, it was so difficult for me to put myself out there because I'd been told all my life I was so talented with languages that actually I took it really hard that I wasn't. True story. That, for example, like given the choice to listen to a podcast from home while I'm cleaning or listen to something that would be educational for me to help pick up Mandarin, I would have 100% picked the podcast from home. And that was a very humbling moment for me. So having been through that experience, I really, really do admire the effort. And if I look like I'm picking stuff up around you, I'm a very good parrot. It doesn't mean it sticks, okay? It's not sticking. Since you have listed all these podcasts and sources, thank you so much for that because I'm sure it will help some of the listeners. For someone who is struggling to learn Spanish, what would your biggest piece of advice be?
Yeah, I don't think I can narrow it down to one, but I'll try and give you just a few. I would say find something you enjoy because anytime you're like studying something, working on something that you don't enjoy, I find, at least for me, it just makes me tired. I'm like, I've been trying to study a lot of things recently, and the things I learn I don't like put me to sleep. It could be right in the middle of the day, and I have lost all desire to continue with my studying. So find something that you enjoy and switch things up. I think just doing the same thing all the time probably gets monotonous. It gets a little boring also. So just switching things up to keep it fresh and, stay consistent, because even now, if I don't listen to any Spanish, go a couple of days without speaking Spanish a lot, I find, that next day when I have to use my Spanish, I'm like, where did it go? Like, how have I been studying for 3 years and I just kind of stop speaking or listening for a couple of days, and I'm like, I don't know how to have a conversation anymore. I don't, like, what I'm thinking and what I want to say doesn't come naturally to me if I don't keep consistent with it. And yeah, I guess on top of that, I would say just keep things challenging where you already know most of what's happening, but there has to be some things that you don't understand yet. If you start at a level that's like you don't understand anything, I don't think it'll just naturally come to you. You will continue to not understand it. And if you're at a level where, this is way too easy for me, I think at the same time you don't get much out of it.
Okay, that's really good advice. That's true as an English teacher as well. I do tell my students that they have to stay consistent even if it's 15 minutes a day. So I 100% agree with that. So Drew, is there anything that you could share with us in Spanish?
Sí, se supone que sí. Tenemos una reunión cada 2 semanas en miércoles entre 7 y 9 en un restaurante que se llama Monte Gelato. So, si alguien escucha eso y quiere venir, por favor, viene con nosotros.
¿Y qué hacen allá cuando se reúnen?
¿Qué hacen? Solo hablamos y comemos un poco de helado y tal vez tomamos un poco de cerveza y ya. Y decimos que es entre 7 y 9, pero cada noche nos quedamos allá hasta como las 10 o cuando nos dijeron que necesitamos salir.
Entonces se quedan hasta que ya es hora de irse. Pero ahí tú mencionaste que les enseñas a las personas bueno, tú les ayudas a practicar su inglés. Uh-huh. Y que me imagino que tú también les estás ayudando a los que hablan inglés a aprender un poquito de español.
Sí, usualmente ayudo a la gente que necesitan aprender un poco más de inglés o al revés, si necesito un poco de ayuda en español, alguien va a ayudarme y más que todo solo hablamos y necesitamos como un lugar, un espacio para practicar hablando, ¿no? Y no me importa si hago errores, solo es que necesito hablar para hablar con más fluidez.
¿Y hay costo de entrada para participar en este evento?
No, es gratis, pero si quieres tomar una cerveza o comer helado, sí, va para comprar eso, pero no, puedes unirte en la reunión libre.
Muchas gracias, Drew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we can switch back to English. So we're coming to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for being here today, Drew. I think that your trajectory in Mexico has been really interesting, just coming from the US, coming from Florida to Merida, to being here in Querétaro now, to learning the Spanish the way that you have. The only question I have for you now is there a particular phrase or word that you really like that's quite Mexican?
Ahuevooooo. Yep, ahuevooooo. So I like that a lot. And most of the phrases I like aren't the most PG phrases that I've learned here. So yeah, I'm trying to become more comfortable, I guess, speaking more natively or feeling comfortable, right? Like if I swear in English, it feels very comfortable to me and natural. And what I found interesting is if you say something offensive, if you say something that's like a swear, if you say something that's not, it's very abrupt or not the nicest thing you can say, but you say it in a different language that's not natural to you, you don't really register how other people think about it. You don't really notice like, oh, I shouldn't have said that here, because to yourself, it doesn't mean the same thing to someone who's a native speaker. I'm trying to learn better how to recognize, I guess, what is more appropriate when and how people are going to receive what I'm saying, because to me, it's just all I've learned, and I don't take offense to anything anyone says in Spanish because it's not my native language.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like, cuss me out, but it's like, oh, it sounds really cool. I'm totally not offended. Like, it's probably an experience for you rather than something that you take personally. So, a huevo is your phrase, huh?
A huevo.
A huevo. On that lovely note, if you want to learn more from Drew and chat with him about anything, you can find him at Monte Gelato during the language exchanges. And a huevo.
A huevo.
On that lovely note, thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule to have this conversation.
Thanks for having me.